Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. And all of us have been, whether watching on TV, hearing about it on radio news, seeing it on the internet, the devastation that's taken place down in the southeastern part of our country. You know, the Asheville area down in that part of things, it's just enormous, the amount of damage. But there've been a lot of Kansas folks that have been down there helping. And one of those, and talking about challenging times and amazing work, is we've had some Kansas down there from the Swiss Water Rescue Task Force, and their team have been down there helping people recover and helping people get their water back. Our guest is a spokesman for the Kansas Fire Marshal, Lance Fye. And Lance, good to have you on our program today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I certainly appreciate it.
You know, Lance, one of the things, the Kansas Fire Marshal, and I really didn't know that we even had in the state of Kansas, a Swift Water Rescue Resource Task Force. What's that?
Sure. Yeah, so, we have about 400 or 500 members across the state. Basically, they're professionally trained firefighters from local jurisdictions who have their main job is with their local cities, counties, fire districts, and that sort of thing. But they do specialized training for urban search and rescue and swift water rescue. And the state of Kansas, the Kansas State Fire Marshal, is the one who coordinates and oversees that. And that's a program we've been doing for about 9 years now. We've been overseeing that. And so we have a specific employee who is the Emergency Response Search and Rescue Program Coordinator. And so he gets pretty busy trying to organize and keep all those people up to date on training with equipment and that sort of thing. And it's specifically put together for this exact reason. They haven't deployed for about 5 years. So it was nice for them to be able to get out and be deployed to head down to Florida.
Well, Lance, the number of people that were involved in this, because obviously the devastation was massive, and so they needed people from around the country. How many came from Kansas, and how many came from other parts of the U.S.?
So Kansas, the first initial deployment was 20 individuals. 3 of those individuals were from the Kansas State Fire Marshal's office, and then 17 of them were from surrounding other jurisdictions. And we call them Kansas Task Force 1, and they went down to Florida where I think there are 28 state task force teams across the country. And of those 28, I believe 20 of them were activated to go down and help. And why that's important is because the local jurisdictions are now focusing on their own responses, their own emergencies, the damage to their own property. Fire departments were losing equipment in the hurricane, and so they couldn't respond to certain things. And so the EMAC, which is the Emergency Assistance Compact that is done, is all across the country. So if Kansas has a disaster like we did in Greensburg years ago, they could actually request assistance from other states to come in and help, because knowing our local jurisdictions will be busy doing their own thing.
What do you hear from the team that went down there? Because what were their jobs actually there?
So, the team goes down and each has a different assignment. We have people who are there just on the administrative side, tracking the hours worked, the paperwork, because it does get confusing when an EMAC takes place of who's paying for what. Everything has to be tracked. All the assets that get used, they have to monitor that. So, we have a task force leader who's essentially serves as the leader of the actual task force. Our fire marshal employee, one of those, they're kind of a coordinator while they're down there, and they oversee the assets and make sure everything is working properly, getting things to where they're going, receiving, some days a point of contact, receiving their assignments each day. And so it's very well structured. When it happens, they want to be able to know who to reach out to. Okay, you guys are now going from Orlando down to the Tampa area for the day, and this is going to be your assignment. They're out in boats, doing swift water rescue, providing basic life support and first aid to individuals. If they needed transportation for animals or humans to another location, then they would be able to transport them. Sometimes they were on foot, walking through neighborhoods. Sometimes they were on ATVs, driving around trying to just search structures and residents and buildings just to make sure if there are people there, if they need help. And they would track that information on a software program, on an app on their phones, so we would know it's already been searched. So they're not duplicating, the same process over. So a second team doesn't go in and have to do the same thing to do an initial search. They may have to go back and do a secondary search because something that was found there, but they don't have to just do that basic search all over again.
How soon after the original storm did the task force go down there? Because some of us saw photos. I know I was one that saw photos of houses actually floating away
Yeah.
or just completely destroyed. How soon
So,
after that? What do you do?
yeah, our team deployed on September 24th in the evening. Took about 2 days to get down there. And so they were there, I believe, prior to landfall. And they were in a staging area. They expected to be able to get some rest that first night. Got to bed about 30 minutes after getting to sleep. They got the call, hey, we need you. And so they packed up and loaded and went out and started doing the thing. And the things that they see, one can only be able to understand if you see them in person. I can't describe what that stuff is like. It's total devastation to see people's properties totally destroyed, gone, houses floating down rivers, big semi trucks, buses, big fire engines being destroyed and floating away. So it is just very catastrophic for the local communities, but they have a sense of peace knowing there's somebody there that can help out. And every one of these teams train in similar ways. So when Kansas task force there, they can work closely with Texas task force doing the same functions and not have to be retrained on how they're going to actually approach the problem.
So, number one goal is not to rescue that fire truck that's floating down the river. It's to rescue people. How do they go about doing that?
So, some of the time, if people will try to ride the storm out and they'll be stranded in their house. And the only way to get there is through a boat. We had hard bottom boats and also inflatable boats that they were able to use to maneuver through the waters. Part of the problem is when you're in about 5 or 6 feet of water like that, you have no idea what's underneath. Mailboxes, landscaping for homes that might have rocks. And so you have to be very careful when you're going through those areas on those boats, trying to get up to the house. Sometimes you'll see video or pictures of people who were up on the roof of their house. And in those scenarios, if the water's not that high, maybe a helicopter would come in and help rescue those. Now, none of our staff or personnel were actually on a helicopter doing that, but they might have been retrieving those individuals to take them somewhere for a helicopter, then airlift them out to somewhere else. So
Many cases you think, well, okay, we'll just send the people down there, but you have the products, like you say, the products, the support equipment that goes along with this. And you talk about 2 days getting down there. Do you have trailers, a massive truck? How do you get all the equipment down there that your team's going to need?
So certainly the Kansas State Fire Marshal has several full-size heavy-duty pickups and some trailers, but also these local fire departments. Sometimes they receive grants from FEMA to buy trailers, to buy boats. And the purpose of doing that are for these sort of exact scenarios. So they know ahead buying them that they're going to potentially be deployed out of their jurisdiction to help that. So in the city of Olathe, they sent a couple firemen. Junction City did. Manhattan loaded up their their all-terrain vehicle, their side-by-side, which was purchased with grant money to help for these exact sort of scenarios. So while the property belongs to those local agencies, it was purchased with federal dollars and the potential of that. So they are convoying down. And like you said, it's like, we're sending at least 2 of our own vehicles and they're sending several of their vehicles and trucks. It's got to be quite a sight for people on the road and it wasn't just Kansas, so you're coming in from all over the country, seeing this go down there. And it's got to be somewhat of a relief for the local residents to see the help coming in.
Who coordinates all this once the hurricane goes? Okay, you get there, and there was a massive, I know, undertaking to get people out. Many people, like you said, decided to stay. But who coordinates who goes where with what? Because there's a lot of Florida that was affected by this last storm, and getting people in the right spot would seem to be a massive, there could be confusion if it's not done right. How is that set up?
So the incident management teams, it's a structure NIMS has set up many years ago. In this type of scenario, there were federal teams there, which were FEMA-run teams, but then there were also state-run teams, which is what we were. Excuse me. And so there will be an in an incident command, you have your incident commander, you have your logistics person, you have your liaison person, you have your public information officer set up. And so the federal team, the FEMA team will have that set up, and they're coordinating the efforts of the federal teams that they have. Then also the state team will have set up a incident command system as well. And then that is who's going to coordinate the state agencies that are down there. Now, as you go from each location, because the first team was deployed to Florida, and prior to as they were being demobilized initially the first time, they then made a second deployment to North Carolina. So they went from working under, the guise of the Florida location to now working under North Carolina system. And it was being done a little bit different, but they were still able to manage that. They have what's called a BOO, BOO, which is a base of operations. That's where they report back to, and that's the centralized location, the office area where they're getting their orders from and their assignments from. And so that area is where it's kind of like the brains of the operation, essentially, are set up. Our state has recently purchased, our fire marshal's office, a couple of Starlink satellite systems that are mobile. So when they were out in the actual field, cell data was down. So there's no cell phone, no data transfers. But at the BOO, we were able to set up our Starlink and actually have then some sort of communication back home, so they could relay to us some of the things they were doing, some things that maybe they needed additionally, and concerns. And so communication was able to be set up thanks to that sort of satellite system that we had. There's just pre-planning before these events happen is what helps us be successful when they do happen.
Lance, somebody may be sitting out there going, who pays for all this?
That's a very good question. The initial agencies responding are required to pay for their staff down there, but then there will be reimbursement coming back, and that's part of that emergency management assistance compact that they all sign. And so the initial payment comes out, and then there'll be a reimbursement. That's why we send some of our staff down to coordinate all the paperwork. It's very important that paperwork's done right and it gets turned in so reimbursement can take place. The last thing we want to do is have these cities and agencies who have agreed to supply their staff and assets to go to this to get stuck with the bill for a length of time. So we want to make sure that it gets done properly and reimbursement gets submitted. And that will then come from federal funding at some point, either from FEMA or Homeland Security or however that gets done. Eventually we'll get reimbursed back through the system. So those local agencies then are not actually out the money in the end.
Lance Fye is our guest here on Forward Ever. And we're going to come back and talk about where all of these responders came from, because I understand there were 2 task forces. They came from different parts of the state. And we'll talk about that when we come back. We're going to take a quick break after this from Worth Wealth Management.
Since 1776, the United States of America continues to stand tall. It's been tested before, many times. Through grit and the ability to move forward, we create better tomorrows. We help our clients live their best lives to and through retirement. We make it easier. Thank you, Kansas. Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Welcome back once again to Forward Ever. Leading in challenging times, Lance Fye is our guest, who is with the Kansas Fire Marshal's office and is talking about what happened and what the response has been from Kansas teams down following the 2 hurricanes that went through both Florida and South Carolina, North Carolina, that whole area that has been devastated by those. Lance, we went in and talked about what was going on down there, but there were 2 teams involved with this whole process. Are both those teams still there, and where did those teams come from?
Well, actually, both teams are finally back now. And so the initial deployment, which we called Kansas Task Force 1, those 20 individuals came from several different entities. So I mentioned the Kansas State Fire Marshal had employees that went down. So did the Derby Fire Department, the Junction City Fire Department, Manhattan Fire Department. Also, we sent Neosho Memorial Regional Medical Center employees, because part of our task force team is sending medical personnel who can perform those first aid and basic life support. The Olathe Fire Department, Sedgwick County Fire District 1, and the Wichita Fire Department. So those were all part of Kansas Task Force 1. They did their initial deployment in Florida, on their way back, reassigned to North Carolina, and then got released and came back home. In the process of that, of course, Hurricane Milton kicked in, and that became then a second deployment, which we called Kansas Task Force 2. Now, a little problem with that is there's not an actual Kansas Task Force 2. We're always all Kansas Task Force 1. This is the first time we can remember that we've had back-to-back deployments so quickly to differentiate our personnel and paperwork so we don't get them confused with Hurricane Milton compared to Hurricane Helene. We went with Kansas Task Force 2, even though they're still Kansas Task Force 1. So then they got deployed. It was right before Milton hit, and they were down there staging before Milton hit. But those individuals, again, from the Kansas State Fire Marshal's office, so we had 3 of our own employees there. Of those 3, 1 came back with the initial deployment. The rest of Task Force 1 was coming back, and Kansas Task Force 2 was going down. They met up at a prearranged location. Imagine trying to rendezvous all these different people, different equipments at one point, and so they could trade off some equipment, get some different personnel switched off. So of the original 20 that went down, 3 of those actually stayed for the second deployment, and 17 came home. So then going back down, there were 16 more people went down on the second deployment. So we only had 19 instead of 20. We had a scenario where one of the individuals who was initially supposed to go wasn't able to make it. But those individuals were from, again, our office, the Kansas State Fire Marshal, the Chanute Fire Department, Cherryvale Fire Rescue, Johnson County Medac, Manhattan Fire Department, Neoto Fire Department, Salina Fire Department, Shawnee, Kansas Fire Department, and again, the Wichita Fire Department. So you see Manhattan and Wichita was able to provide staff for both deployments. But some of these agencies may only have 10 staff members in general on their department, and it's difficult for them to provide more than one or back-to-back deployments. But luckily with Manhattan and Wichita being bigger agencies, they were able to provide people for both deployments. One of the first task force, the task force leader was from Olathe. The second task force, the task force leader was from Wichita. And then that's the person who in the field, oversees everything for them.
Wow, what an operation. And we see what happens down there. You don't see all the cleanup and the effort. You do see people out on boats. Maybe some of those folks we saw on television were from Kansas. Don't know, but they were certainly from around the country. Before we leave, Lance, I want to talk about your background a little bit because leadership is so important. When you talk about these teams going back and forth, you talk about people who are part of the Kansas Fire Marshal's office that do they volunteer for this job?
The people that go on deployment, it is a volunteer scenario. They're not required to participate. But like I said, we have about, upwards of 300 to 500 people at any moment in time who are on our list that we can put together and pull a team together. And so this is something extra on top of their normal duties to be able to go down there. Our particular program, our emergency response search and rescue program coordinator, that's his job. So he's going to be going on these deployments each time. One of the other individuals that went is a retired Kansas State Fire Marshal. He was previously the coordinator of our SAR team, which has been changed. It's now called Search and Rescue, but SAR is the acronym for that. So he stayed on as a consultant with our agency. So he goes down and deploys. It's kind of a nice having the old guard there with the new guard to be able to mesh and mend and be able to do things. So all these people that go down there, it's extra duty they do. They volunteer for it. They don't go down in a volunteer basis where they don't get paid. They are getting paid, but they do volunteer. There's not somebody who's forced to go down. We sent a couple of our own other individuals down who are support staff, and they volunteer for that position as well.
Is there one story that came back that sort of stuck out to you? Because I know there are plenty of stories of what some of the team has done and what they were seeing. Was there one in particular that stood out?
So I got to bring one of the task members back when we came home. I was there when they arrived back to Kansas, and I brought her back to Topeka. And I just let her talk the entire way back because I know that's part of the decompression. being able to, if you don't have the ability to tell people what you did or what you saw, it's going to eat you up inside. So I just let her talk the whole way back. But one of the stories that she shared and we got information on was there was a young man. I say young man, he was probably in his 20s or 30s. I don't know the exact age, but he was in North Carolina, and there were people there that hadn't seen a rescuer in over a week. So the hurricane hit, they hadn't seen a first responder there for a full week until our people got there. Well, they don't have cell service, like we said. And so he could not reach out to his mother, who lived in a different area, to let her know that he was safe, that he survived, and that he was getting the supplies needed. And so our staff was able to use some of our communication equipment for him to communicate via text message back to his mom that he was safe, he was getting what he needed. And the mother was so thankful to hear that information. And one of the staff members from our task force, their comment back was, and that's why we do what we do. That touching moment right there. Just imagine, sometimes we feel burdened when people reach out and we communicate with them. Can you imagine not being able to reach out and communicate with your loved ones? How traumatic that may be and how much anxiety you would have to be able to do that. So them being able to allow that to happen, they all kind of, that kind of made that team come together a little bit more and realize, yeah, now I know why I'm here. This is why I'm doing this. And they're going to want to go back. I guarantee it. Once they have a taste of it, they're going to want to do it again if they have an opportunity. So
such wonderful work by Kansans. Lance, how did you get involved with this? And everybody has a mentor in this that helps to get into the leadership role for leading in these challenging kind of situations. What was your path to get here?
So, I spent 29 years as a Topeka police officer, 15 years as a sergeant. And in my time on the police department, I was able to deploy to a couple of different scenario disasters. One was Greensburg. That particular scenario, I didn't deploy till way after the fact. And we just went and provided police services for the community because they were decimated. But another time I got deployed to Alabama when they had like 50 or 60 tornadoes ran through their state in one day. And in that deployment, I happened to be deployed with Mark Ingholm, who was also a PIO doing stuff for the Kansas Highway Patrol. And then David Bevins was a city spokesperson. So the three of us went down as a group of public information officers to work with the public information officer for the Alabama Emergency Management. And so that 2-week period down there, we got to do public information stuff. I was there. Ironically, I was tasked, one of my duties was making hurricane prevention videos, or what you can do if hurricanes happen, because the tornadoes ripped through, but then hurricane season was about ready to happen. And so people were worried about it. So I was putting some videos. Here's a guy from Kansas who's familiar with tornadoes, not hurricanes, and I'm happy to put together hurricane videos for them. But working with Mark in that 2-week period kind of solidified our friendship and our relationship. And then at some point when the fire marshal's job opened, Mark Ingholm was appointed the state fire marshal by Governor Laura Kelly. And then this position to open, and Mark, knowing my previous experience, offered me an opportunity to come and interview for the job. And I'm very thankful that he did, because, when I was wanting to retire, PIO was always something I enjoyed doing. So having that opportunity now to come on this side and be able to still share the stories of our first responders is something that I'm really happy to be able to do.
Lance, has been tremendous having you on the show, because people don't get a chance to be there, but I know they're proud of Kansans that go to help out in these situations, and appreciate the work you and your team do. If you could pass it along from those of us that are watching and listening here, a lot of us in Western Kansas, we have tornadoes, and we understand the importance of somebody coming in to help when they have these really tremendous storms that come through. That hurricane, both of them were just such a disaster. When we saw that, to have Kansas involved helping kind of makes me proud, and I think it makes other Kansans proud to be a part of the rescue.
I feel like all Kansas should be proud of our state and of our fire marshal's office and the task force that went down there. Those individuals, the sacrifice they have to make to just, and a whim's notice, leave their families behind, leave their pets behind, let somebody else have to worry about that, to go down and then worry about other people and taking care of them. That takes a lot. So I think everybody should be proud of the work that they did. And, we have a very well recognized team, and that's something also to be proud of.
Lance, thanks for being here. Thanks to you and the team for being such leaders in challenging times. Lance Fye has been our guest. He's part of the Kansas Fire Marshal's office and the teams that went down and covered the hurricane disaster in both Florida and the southeastern parts of our country. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of Forward Ever, and thanks to Worth Wealth Management for sponsoring our program. Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.